Hi, and welcome to Trade War. My name is Blaine, and I will be doing the introduction. The background will be done by Tiffany. Development into the trade war will be done by Qianlin, and impact on the US and China will be done by Chris. Conclusion by Haley. International trade is a major part of the global economy. I think we all know this. Here I have a chart of global trade from 1800 into the modern era. Trade between the United States and China is massive, having grown steadily since China began reform and opening up. However, we can see this trade is not evenly balanced. China exports much more to the US than the US exports to China. International trade is a major part of the global economy, as I said before, but this was not always the case. In the mercantilist era, countries believed that the best strategy for them to pursue was to maximize exports and minimize imports. Countries can do this by putting tariffs, special taxes, quotas, or other restrictions on imports while trying to promote their own exports. Of course, this leads to a logical problem. If country A puts trade barriers on country B's products, country B will retaliate. This is a trade war, and it was the normal state of affairs during the mercantilist era. The goal of most countries in this era was self-reliance on the goods and services they needed, but then also to corner the market on important supplies that other countries had to import, tariffs or not. In this situation, the trade war can benefit country A and hurt country B, or hurt both country A and country B, but hurt country B more, and A still wins. They didn't care about overall economic growth, only their own strength measured against their rivals. To the mercantilists, the world economy was a zero-sum game. For there to be a winner, there had to be a loser. And this fierce competition led to war, colonization, and vast human suffering. Since the 1800s, mercantilist theories have generally fallen out of favor, being replaced by liberalism. Liberalism is based on the idea that the global economy is not a zero-sum game, that economic transactions can be win-win. Liberal international trade theory is guided by a number of ideas, that specialization in global trade helps everyone. This process creates an interconnected world, makes us wealthier, and less likely to go to war, and that barriers to trade and policies of self-reliance hurt more than they help. Let me give you an example of specialization and comparative advantage. I'm good at making wine, you're good at making cars. We can both benefit by producing these goods and trading them. Critics of liberal philosophy, however, have many arguments and a diverse range of perspectives. Because we are focusing on the US-China trade war, we would like to focus on the economic nationalist theories of international trade. Under an economic nationalist model, the economic well-being of a country is analyzed in relation to its competitors. Under liberalism, economic well-being is analyzed in absolute terms. Consider this example. I am the US government. I'm making a trade deal with the Chinese government. Currently, the US economy has a GDP of 10 trillion USD per year, and China 5 trillion USD per year. I have two choices. Option 1, a trade deal where both countries grow their total GDP by 2%. Option 2, a trade deal where China grows by 10% per year and the US grows by 5% per year. An economic nationalist would choose option 1 because their primary concern is their home country's economic power in relation to other countries. An economic liberal would choose option 2 because 5% growth is better than 2% growth. To an economic liberal, the economic power of other countries is not a major concern. But why does an economic nationalist care about the performance of another country if their economy and their people are doing well? The economic nationalist would argue that economic, political, and military power are fundamentally inseparable. The power of the government is their primary concern. This does not always have malicious intent, but the threat of war is a fundamental concern of all states. Economic nationalists believe that global politics is inherently anarchic and that might makes right. This theoretical foundation sets the stage for the turn American policymakers experienced somewhere between the Obama administration and the current Trump administration. And now on to the background of trade by Tiffany. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Tiffany. After the introduction, you shall understand the importance of the global trade. In the following parts, I will introduce the background of the trade situation in US and China and the reason why it developed into a trade conflict. China's economic reform began in 1978. It has opened up its economy for about 4 decades. In 2001, China joined the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and had an extensive margin of opening up. Subsequently, between 2001 and 2017, Chinese economy has further intensified and opening up its market to the world, being the world factory. Meanwhile, in 2008, you shall remember the shocking financial crisis worldwide. Luckily, China was not hit the most and had deeper opening up. Therefore, in 2015, China replaced the US as the largest importer. Since 2017, the 19th National Congress in China announced the economy is all round opening up. Since 2018, the trade conflict between China and US began. Let's look at the export and GDP of the China. China had an impressive economic growth over the past 10 years. In the graph, the height of the bar tells you the contribution of the net export to the total output. The line tells you the GDP growth rate. You can see in 2017, the net export made up 3.47% of China's total GDP, indicating China is having more net export and more impact in the world trade. Then how about the relationship under the Trump's office? Donald Trump took office of White House in 2017. Since then, he took a tough stance on the trade policy. In June 2017, Trump initiated an investigation based on the national security against the import of the Chinese goods, such as the steel and aluminum. The next year, he even signed an executive memorandum adding an extra tariff on the Chinese goods. In sum, US alleged the Chinese government provided subsidies for the exporters and imposed high import tariffs. This led to the three causes of the trade war. First, it is the growing US trade deficit with China. Second and third reason is about the politics in US and the global economic dominance by the US government. In details, the first cause is the US trade deficit with China. The deficit has been growing in both absolute and relative terms by referring to the chart. In 2017, the trade deficit with China has become a major source of net export of the US, accounting for about 46% of the total deficit. The trade imbalance has been the root of the US national debt crisis, and it motivated the US government to wage a trade war against China. Second, about the political system in America, that it has the midterm election in 2018. The vote result indicates the voters' verdict on the President Trump the elected 2 years ago. And Trump promised in his election campaign to solve the trade deficit problem. Therefore, he had to initiate a trade war to secure the vote this year. But obviously, Trump failed. The last cause is about the global economic dominance. US is used to be dominating the economy globally, but now China is growing fast that its production volume ranks second worldwide. The GDP surpassed the US one in the purchasing power parity term, and the renminbi is gaining an increasing importance, having a major economic impact and power. Other initiatives such as the One Belt One Road, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the campaign made in China 2025, all these pose threats to the US dominancy. Knowing the threefold cause gives us a deeper understanding of the trade war. Most importantly, it provides us a framework to analyze the future evolvement.
Good evening, everyone. Hope you can see me and hear me clearly. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to give you an introduction to you about the trade war between China and the United States. The subject of my presentation is the development of the trade war. In the past 2 years, the economy of China and the United States have all been influenced in a negative way because of the divergence between China and the United States in trade and the actions they have taken. It is obvious that the fluctuations in the economy in the two countries are mainly caused by the trade war. To change the situation, leaders of the two countries and their trade negotiators held several rounds of negotiations in late 2018 and early 2019. This is a brief timeline of the trade war in the past 2 years. For the beginning, which initiated the trade war, is Made in China 2025. The Trump administration announced the list of planned tariffs mainly include the top 10 areas in the Made in China 2025 plan. What mentioned above can conclude that the Trump administration wants to suppress the development of Made in China 2025. Then comes to the Section 301. It is an important enforcement tool in the field of U.S. trade and can be used to counter unfair trade policies, regulations, and practice of U.S. trading partners. On March 22nd, 2018, Special 301 was held towards China. It represents the beginning of the trade war. Below the picture is the influencing process of the U.S. action. Next, the U.S. Commerce Department said it was imposing an export ban on the ZTE for violating a settlement reached with the US. ZTE's products like telecom equipment, mobile terminal are extremely dependent on the United States. As a result, ZTE's stock plunged. ZTE's market value dropped by about a half, more than 50 billion yuan, evaporate. Under this environment, Chinese enterprises like ZTE are faced with greater debt problems, so they can't focus on research and development. Thus, they will continue to keep a distance from American technology enterprises as the US government wish. Next, on May 14th, the Foreign Ministry announced that Liu He of the State Council will visit the US from 15 to 19 May. The final result is the release of joint statement between China and the United States, which allows the two sides agreed to take effective measures to reduce the U.S. trade deficit in goods with China. It can be seen that the power of the U.S. in the international trade is indeed exists. At the same time, the U.S. feels China's bottom line. The two sides discussed expanding trade in manufactured goods and services and reached agreement on creating favorable conditions to encourage trade in these areas. Then, on June 15th, the White House announced that it would impose a 25% tariff on Chinese imports. The list includes 1,102 products for a total of 50 billion. According to the content released by China, the amount is exactly the same as that of the United States, and the effective date is the same, which shows that China fully expressed the concept of equality. Is a passive counterattack, but it is very well prepared. In conclusion, a trade war would only put both sides in what game theory calls a prisoner's dilemma, in which both sides would lose out. On July 10th, the US government issued tariffs plan against China. So 200 billion yuan goods, 200 billion dollar goods target product list including clothing, television, refrigerator parts, as well as a large number of consumer goods. On August 23rd, the United States imposed 25% tariffs on about 16 billion of imports from China. And on September 18th, the White House issued a statement announcing the imposition of 10% tariffs on 200 billion worth of Chinese goods to the US. On May 10th, 2018, then comes to the ceasefire agreement in December 2018. They reached an agreement at the G20 summit and suspend the imposition of new tariffs on each other, then set a 3-month period for negotiations. But on May 10th, 2019, the United States imposed 25% tariffs on 200 billion of Chinese goods. And on May 13th, 2019, the Office of the United States Trade Representative issued a statement proposing to impose 25% tariffs on 300 billion of Chinese goods. And on February 24th, the 7th round of China-US trade negotiations, which lasted for 4 days, came to a successful end in Washington. China and the United States reached important agreement on 6 aspects like no-tariff barriers. It can be seen that China and the United States are satisfied with the negotiation process and are willing to reach an agreement as soon as possible to ease the current trade crisis. Trump said that the outcome of the trade talks is what both China and the United States want to see, and the US government has promised to postpone the planned increase of tariffs on Chinese goods to the US. The fact that China and the United States have been able to achieve initial results so quickly is due to the fact that both sides have been able to put themselves in each other's shoes and safeguard each other's interests.
Hi, this is Chris. I'm going to elaborate on the part of the impact of trade conflict between China and the United States. I would like to give a brief comment that during the period of which major conflict happens, that is 2018 to 19, both the Chinese and US economy indeed were slightly affected, as the majority of the battlefield is on tariffs. The trade and investment between China and US were reduced, but when compared with the COVID-19 outbreak for this year, it hits both the two economies more, and it also hinders the recovery of the two countries and the global economy. Let's begin with the observation of the Chinese economy. During 2018 and 19, we can see that the Chinese economy is gradually decelerating starting from 18 quarter 1, reaching the slowest growth in 19 quarter 3, 6%, and it is also the weakest growth of China's GDP in 29 years. However, it is still within the Chinese government's target of 6 to 6.5%. Things get worse after the outbreak of COVID-19. In 20 quarter 1, the GDP reached the 12th of a record contraction of negative 6.8% since 1992, but it rebounded to positive 3 to 4% in quarter 2 and 3. China is almost the first major economy to report growth following the coronavirus pandemic, and it is recovering from all the ground it lost in the first half of this year. According to a report by the United Nations Trade and Development Conference in November last year, it is stated that the US consumers are affected the most during the Sino-US trade conflict. The report pointed out that because of the tariff hikes between the two countries, in USI as a big consumer market, the negative effect of tariff hikes will cause the final product of commodity price to increase, which places a high pressure to the US citizens and wholesale market. The report also adds that from China's side, in order to alleviate the cost brought by the tariff hikes, the Chinese enterprises and factories are trying to reduce their price on the production side too, in which the chemical furniture, electronic and mechanical industry are affected in a large scale. Therefore, the report gives us a conclusion that since both countries are battling in tariffs, it will put the global economy at risk in an indirect way, since China is a world factory, and its production price as well as economic policies are affected. In this year's April, China resumed the factory production from pandemic. It is interesting that in first half of 2020, China's textile export, including masks, increased 32.4% year-over-year. There were also increases in medicine, medical machines, and devices too. We might consider this as a helping hand towards China export, but it still takes time to observe as the pandemic is still ongoing. Continue with the look of US economy. 18 Q2 is the highest growth rate in US nominal GDP with a very good outlook. Since then, the US GDP is gradually decelerating. Investment and import, especially from China, jobs hindered the growth of GDP in 19 and failed to meet President Trump's of a 3% growth target at last. Other than GDP, the US economy is slightly affected during trade conflicts. It's also because other figures like the non-farm payrolls surged beyond expectations, and an unemployment rate is also at the lowest record for half a century, 3.5%. Yes, again, because of the COVID-19, the May 20th unemployment rate surged to 14.7%, a record high index. Yet it is slowly recovering. In September 20, it's 7.9%, but it is still lower than the market anticipated. It clearly shows that the COVID-19 hits the US economy harder. Here, I would like to go back to the previous UN report. It showed that in first half 20, China's direct investment to US increased 38% year-over-year, but US direct investment to China reduced 31% in contrast. The report addressed that China is restrained towards US economic and trading policies, but if the two countries' relations deteriorate, the investment outlook would become worse. One more thing, the US Federal Reserve has started to cut interest rates since July 19, and now the 5th time already. According to the Federal Reserve, they said the earning outlook of US enterprise will fading, and the investment confidence are deteriorating as well. So the interest rate must cut to stimulate the economy in order to avoid recession in view of the long-term economy. This also shows that the US economy is still unhealthy. The world has started to counter the trade conflicts as US also imposed new tariffs to other countries too. Countries including Canada, EU, Turkey, and Mexico all fought back US with new tariffs, while US also shifted its imports from China to Taiwan too. Finally, I would like to address some Chinese and US political impacts brought to the economy of the two countries. First is the Zhongxin Telecom, ZTE. It was once banned by the US for past selling in 2018, but still banned for participating in the 5G network technology in many countries. And US still consider ZTE as a national security threat with Huawei, and further restricted their trade with US enterprises and using the US funding and resources. This might cause China to develop its chipset and technology by its own, but it is still too early to predict the influence at this moment. Besides, the well-known Chinese social music mobile app TikTok is also almost banned in US as well. The only slight affected enterprises might be Tesla, as its electric cars production branch were set up in Shanghai already, and it largely reduced the car tax to China as it is a producer in China.
Hi, I will be discussing the conclusion for a group presentation of trade war between US and China. But first, we need to understand the beginning of the world trade. Growing population and globalization have made trading inevitable for resources like raw material and fossil fuel. Populated country like China needs to trade something they have in return for fuel. Trade among countries is valuable due to specialization and comparative advantage. Some countries have the specialty to mass produce a certain product in a much cheaper way, even with the lower labor costs. So it's always better off for country A to just import that product than to produce it on their own. So that also means higher economic efficiency, higher productivity for all countries who participate in this global trade. China has the advantage for cheaper labor, higher productivity, mass production. So like in Deng Xiaoping's lead in 1978, China's economy was finally reformed and opening to the outside world. And we also need to understand the reason for the trade war. Developed countries like the US and the UK also experienced industrialization revolution and economic boom in the early 80s. So the US, who had improved production methods in machinery, had gained a lot of capital during that time. Trump, as a businessman, knowing how much China may benefit from the continuous trade, decided to put trade barriers, import tests to prevent China from importing product in the state. So Trump also used it as a major strategy in 2016 US presidential campaign. We also have to understand why trade war may be inevitable. Firstly, the impact of the globalization on developed country and developing country. So the natural relationship for trade is usually developing country, they provide low-end services and product, and developed country, they provide high tech and knowledge. But US is now threatened by China's technology rising with 5G and online payments and etc. The relationship changes. The second reason was historically, when some developed countries gradually passed the era of industrialization, they faced a downfall for the economy, such as UK. Since 1870s, they lost the trade. So due to the economic reason, the US is trying to avoid a downfall to the economy, and Trump is starting to set barriers trying to reform their production force. And for political reasons, these two countries have two fundamental different ideology, and both sides worry they will have impact to nearby countries. So they want to stop both each other's economy. So did Trump get what he wants through the trade war? The first thing that Trump wants was he wants US company to move their factory back to the state to create more jobs. So during the trade war, the US stayed a rather stable investment in China, but China reduced their investment in the state rapidly from $540 million in 2016, and then now to 2019 first half year, China only invests 25 million in the state. And the second thing is Trump wants to reduce trade deficits in China. So the trade deficit is indeed reduced by $600 million year by year since 2019 November, but it's still very high up. But then the US reduced import from China for 700 million, but its export to China is also reduced by 300 million. So that's a lose-lose situation. So both countries have negative impact from the trade war. With no active trade between two of the largest economic power in the world, the competition of the product will slow down, innovation will slow down, as well as the global output. That means lower living standard and slower capital growth. That also may mean starvation, because if you don't have enough of one product in one country, and then that product will become very, very expensive. And then with nowadays population in the world with a global trade, many people may suddenly go jobless, especially for the unskilled labor. In social perspective, the limitation of spread of idea, information, image, and people. So what happened next? The political view of US and China will remain different. We're not sure whether Trump or Biden will win this election, but will the trade war continue? So that's our presentation. Thank you.